Jayden Daniels looks like a quarterback ready to take a big year 2 leap, and the rest of the Commanders are starting to follow his lead at OTAs. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Commanders, where we watch the film, break down the data, and call it like we see it. I am your host, David Harrison. This is your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Not only am I here with you 5 days a week, but I'm also covering the Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com and WUSA9.com. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day. Whether you're an everydayer or just checking us out, I do appreciate you. And of course, to the everydayers who come through for every episode, a special thank you goes out to you as well. And if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to today's episode. If this is your first time here, thanks for finding us. I'm glad you did. Hopefully you like what you hear and you come back for more. Coming up on today's episode, Dan Quinn's culture taking root in year 2, and it's showing in how his coaching staff coaches, how his roster competes, and how his team practices. We're also going to dive into key players that were not at OTA practice number 1 on Wednesday, what it means for guys like Trey, McLaurin, and Laremy Tunsil, and how it's opening the door for early roster battles. But first, Jayden Daniels is playing fast, throwing with confidence, and showing signs that the year 2 leap is already underway, and he's not doing it alone. That's where we're going to start from our OTA practice 1, day 1 notes and observations from Ashburn. Jayden Daniels looked like the best player on the field during Wednesday's OTA session, decisive, confident, and clearly in control of the offense. Now, to be fair to the rest of the roster, the quarterback's really the only one that really gets to showcase everything that he can do, right? Because you don't want your quarterback to hit people. You don't want your quarterback to get hit. You don't necessarily need to see Jayden Daniels throwing or running the football, but you do want to see his arm. You do want to see the command of the offense, and you do love hearing from his coaches how much command he's taking of the offense. So let's be a little bit fair in our assessment here, right? Like Bobby Wagner can't fly around and hit people. None of the defenders can hit people. There's no pass rush. There's no blocking, offensive line to defensive line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, Jayden Daniels looked good, but he also was one of the only people who can, right? But Jayden Daniels looking sharp in 7-on-7, still very encouraging for your second-year quarterback. Quick decision-making, timing throws, confident footwork, well-placed passes to guys that he hasn't had a lot of reps throwing to. So very encouraging for the future. Early on in the 7-on-7 drills, had an early attempt to Deebo Samuel, deep route on the right side of the field. Great ball, great placement over the head of Jonathan Jones, just outside the outstretched arms of Deebo Samuel. I'll tell you right now, it brought me back immediately to Jayden Daniels' rookie season. Last year, the deep balls he was throwing in OTAs, the 3 deep balls he was throwing in mandatory minicamp, and then, of course, in training camp that some of you were fortunate to be able to come out there and see, and then everybody was able to see in season once it started to click. Kind of reminded me a little bit of that. And just shows you that Deebo, like he's a short area guy, he's a screen guy, but this is a dude that can still get down the field if you give him the right matchup, right? So an encouraging rep, even though the two didn't connect on it. Something that really kind of spoke to Jayden Daniels' control of the offense before or after the practice. We got to speak to Dan Quinn, asked him about his observations of Jayden just since they've gotten this offseason program started. Coach Quinn saying, quote, "There is no flinch in Jayden Daniels. He's as focused and relentless as you could be about getting better," end quote. So you might have been seeing Jayden out there doing, photo shoots with Nike, traveling overseas to Paris, things like that. But football never far away from his mind. Kliff Kingsbury before practice told us, quote, "Just watching him move around, he's not thinking as much. He's playing fast and letting his natural gifts kind of take over. And that's what we want to see," end quote. In that vein, Jayden also said, quote, "The main thing is just being comfortable and familiar with the play caller. You know what we're trying to accomplish, play in and play out," end quote. So a lot of synchronicity here going on with the coaching staff, the head coach, the offensive coordinator, the quarterback, and it's trickling down into the formation, trickling down into the offense. So Jayden Daniels, again, standing out for all the right reasons. Of course, he's the quarterback. He's the young gun. He's going to be the guy that we all have our eyes on, but certainly putting on a show. OTA practice number 1, doing a good job within the framework of what he's left, right? Everything needs to be taken in context here, right? Chemistry of the growing weapons. You love seeing that kind of stuff going on. Deebo Samuel, and outside of just that rep, still looked very good. There was a very interesting drill that Bobby Ingram, wide receiver coach, Bobby Ingram was running them through, where they kind of had like all the receivers that weren't participating in the drill were like flapping their arms in front of the receiver that was like running through, kind of like the gauntlet, I guess you could call it, of arms. And then they were throwing a pass into the gauntlet, and the receiver had to focus, right? You have all these arms flailing around you, make the catch, secure the ball. It was really interesting. Never seen a drill like that before. It made a lot of sense. They were doing good on it, but Deebo, obviously did really well in that drill. Seeing him do some of these individual position drills. Look, I've seen Deebo Samuel at the NFL Scouting Combine in 2019. Obviously, I've seen games. I've covered a couple 49ers games where I've seen him on the field, but I've never watched him up close and personal working on, his skill set. Again, it's OTA practice, so don't get too carried away with it. But first time getting to see him, very impressive. Looks fit, right? I know there's a lot of concern about that. He even said himself, right? Somebody asked him kind of like, what's the goal? Right now he said just be in shape, right? So certainly looks like he's playing the part. Another receiver that looked like the part of what you'd pretty much expect to see from him, rookie out of Virginia Tech, Jayden Lane, looked fast, looked twitchy, looked dependable, right? Made some really good plays. Wide receiver 3 potential in him. Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it rookie year wide receiver 3, right? You got Noah Brown out there. Obviously, Luke McCaffrey is going to have his opportunity to make some noise, but you certainly like what you see in Jayden Lane in his film from college. You like the fit for this offense and for this team once he's drafted, and then just getting another look at him following rookie minicamp and now this OTA practice. You just continue to like what you see out of Jaylen. He did an interview with Craig Hoffman. So if you're a listener of his podcast and or radio show or both, be on the lookout for that interview coming pretty soon. I know that Craig told me that he was very impressed by how Jaylen was in the interview. Was getting return tips. Brian Mitchell, franchise legend, radio personality, media personality, just all around good dude. Dan Quinn asked him to come out and kind of help the return specialists go out there, give him some tips, give him some pointers. B. Mitch was happy to do so. There's some clips going out there. I think JP Finley, of course, JP and B. Mitch are very tied together. I think he tweeted some clips of B. Mitch giving some tips and everything like that. So cool moment for the youngster to get a franchise legend out there helping him work on his craft. On the defensive side of things, Mikey Sainristil, pretty much exclusively inside. I say pretty much exclusively inside because I didn't watch every 7-on-7 drills. While 7-on-7 drills were going on, the offensive line was also working. So obviously I want to see a little bit of both. So I flip-flopped. So I'll tell you, every rep I saw Mikey Sainristil take was in the slot. Can't tell you that was every rep because I didn't watch every rep. Trey Amos looked very, very good. Had an interception against Jayden Daniels. We'll talk about here in a second. Looked very sticky in coverage, even though he's not allowed to get super physical and do those things. Very much looked like he belonged on an NFL practice field. Tight coverage, forcing tough throws. Jonathan Jones also looked impressive. 2 plays in particular early in 7-on-7 that I wanted to kind of mention. Both interceptions from Jayden Daniels. Calm down. It's okay. Like I said, looked very strong, looked very confident. It's a good day. Even though you throw the 2 interceptions, it's okay. The first one, pass intended for Michael Gallup in 7-on-7s, bounces off Gallup's hands, deflects into the air. Jeremy Reeves right there, opportunistic, takes advantage, gets the ball, runs downfield, holds up the ball, his trophy with pride. Very next rep, Jayden goes right back to Michael Gallup, and you love seeing that from the quarterback. Go back to your veteran receiver, show him, hey, dude, I got it. We all make mistakes. We're coming right back to you. Unfortunately, got his feet tangled with Trey Amos in coverage. No flag thrown. I don't believe should have been a flag thrown. Amos was stumbling. Gallup goes down. Amos able to come up with the football. Really impressive catch. Ball skills, hand-eye coordination, body control, all of it. Amos almost got another pick later on in the 7-on-7s as well. So Trey Amos definitely coming out of his first OTA practice feeling pretty good. But while Jayden Daniels was making headlines on the field, a few big names were making them by not being on the field. What that means might matter just as much, and that's next on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. While OTAs are all about building chemistry and starting the early install on the system, the NBA playoffs are all about making history, and Thursday night could be just that. The Knicks are 4.5-point favorites at home, but the Indiana Pacers can steal Game 5 and punch their ticket to the 2024-25 NBA Finals. If you got to read on who's rising or ready to break out, FanDuel makes it easy to turn that insight into action with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. FanDuel gives you more ways than ever to bet smart before tip-off and live. If you've been tracking Tyrese Halliburton's playmaking or Pascal Siakam's consistency, you're already halfway to building a smarter bet. Stack that knowledge in a same-game parlay and make the most of it. If you're new to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com, place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. So make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Terry McLaurin, Laremy Tunsil, and Marshon Lattimore not practicing, not on the field Wednesday in Ashburn for the first day of OTA practices. Dorrance Armstrong present, not practicing, wearing street clothes. And while it is voluntary, their absences certainly still raised some eyebrows. Dorrance Armstrong Jr. being there, not raising as many eyebrows. The three guys who weren't there at all raising eyebrows. Terry McLaurin, look, entering the final year of his contract, he wants a new deal. He wants an extension. It's not an unusual tactic. It's clearly an agent tactic and something that he was advised to do by his agent. Don't necessarily disagree with it. You know what I mean? I don't think it's necessarily a bad tactic. He skipped OTAs before, wanting a new extension, got the new extension returned. No big deal going on there. Laremy Tunsil, pretty much a normal vet move, right? He's been in the league for a while. We've all kind of talked about his age, and some have wondered how much is his age going to really hinder him. Well, the more you're out here doing these intense workouts and all this stuff, the more that age might go out there and bite you in the butt. But a new leader on the team, should he be present, you can certainly make the case for it. Is it going to be detrimental to his ability moving forward into the season and training camp and all that stuff? No, I don't believe it's going to. Marshon Lattimore, he is the guy that I think the fans are really going to give some grief to for not being there. However, really not surprised by it, right? Like, it's kind of Marshon's MO. If you remember when he was traded, to the Commanders, going back to everydayers, right? I talked to Ross Jackson on Locked On Saints, and Marshon's kind of never really been a guy to win on his technique. He wins because he's physical and he's a dog. He's just going to make everything hard for you if you're an opposing receiver. So talking about a phase that's really all about developing skills and techniques and all that stuff, and that's not really Marshon Lattimore's thing. And again, he's kind of always just marched to the beat of his own drum. You know what I mean? He's just his own man. So not really surprised that he wasn't there. But I know a lot of Commanders fans, I know some Commanders media are really kind of, a little bit hyper focused on like, hey, dude, you didn't really, perform the way that a lot of us thought you were going to when this team traded for you. This is kind of a big deal, and we're kind of looking to see you take that step, towards showing that you are an all-pro caliber, Pro Bowl caliber cornerback. So, a lot of people wanted to see him there. And certainly if there are any struggles, even in training camp, and Marshon is struggling, people are going to point back to this OTA period, even though I don't know how much of a difference it really would have made. So while we all certainly have our takes on it, I'm not really concerned about any of them, to be quite honest with you. But, some people are. Dan Quinn's message about it, more calm, right? Quote, "It's not one size fits all, but this has been a fantastic offseason. I've been in touch with every guy on the team," end quote. Dan didn't get, into specifics over any of these players or talking to any of them or anything like that, but, didn't seem all that bothered about it either at the same time. And, again, like I said, personally, I'm not really all that bothered by it either. And as far as, potential leaders, Marshon's not a leader. Laremy Tunsil certainly could be a leader and, talked about bringing his leadership style over from the Houston Texans with him. Terry McLaurin clearly is a leader, whether it's, by stature or by action. Certainly was more vocal last year than I've ever seen him be. There's still other leaders out there on the field. Jayden Daniels himself talked about leadership, said, quote, "You have the standard set. You have the core guys that set the standard, and we got those guys back. Bringing in new people, we'll hold them to that standard," end quote. So not talking specifically about guys missing the OTAs, but just talking about that standard. You're just talking about, look, there's still Bobby Wagner, there's Zach Ertz, there's all kinds of guys on this team that helped set that standard last year. They're going to make sure these new guys understand that standard and live up to it. Getting to some roster battles that we've been watching, or I should say we've been talking about. Now we get to start watching them as the OTAs practice really kick off. Right tackle, Andrew Wiley versus Josh Conerly versus Brandon Coleman. Basically looks like it's going to be Andrew Wiley versus Josh Conerly Jr. We kind of talked about expecting Brandon Coleman to move inside, so not really a whole lot of shock there. But basically Andrew Wiley, Josh Conerly Jr., reps were pretty even. Again, full disclosure, I didn't watch every snap of the offensive line working group that was over there because they were working while 7-on-7s were working. So I'm trying to get you a little bit of both, watching 7-on-7s for a period of time, watching their offensive line for a period of time as well. So again, I didn't see every single rep. So if you hear a little bit of something different from somebody else, certainly possible. I'm just telling you what I was able to see with my one set of two eyes. Andrew Wiley getting your primary, I guess you want to call it first team. You can call it that. Reps. Josh Connerly Jr. getting, more so, I guess, second team reps, even though I don't really like calling it that right now. But that's something that Kliff Kingsbury kind of talked about, right? First round picks in this group are not going to just be handed jobs. We saw it with Jayden Daniels last year. Kliff Kingsbury before practice said, quote, "That's what I love about this culture DQ has. Everything's earned," end quote. When Josh Connerly earns a starting job for this team, he's going to know he earned it. It wasn't his draft capital. It wasn't his paycheck. It wasn't anything other than his work, his blood, sweat, and tears and effort that got him that job. Other spots on the offensive line, Nick Allegretti at right guard. I think a lot of us talked about like Trent Scott, maybe Brandon Coleman. Didn't really talk about Nick Allegretti moving from left guard so much, but that is where we saw Nick a lot here on the first day of OTA practice. Brandon Coleman was the left guard for much of the time. Trent Scott filling that left tackle spot while Laremy Tunsil was away. We talked to Tyler Biadasz, the Washington Commanders starting center, and we talked to Dan Quinn about Tyler Biadasz and kind of how his role is with introducing all these new players and how much of a sense of responsibility he takes to make sure the new guys in their positions, the new guys on the team are up to speed, up to snuff on what their responsibilities are, where they're supposed to be. So we'll talk a little bit more about that either here at the end of the week or coming into next week. Slot corner, Mikey Sainristil. Every rep I saw Mikey Sainristil saw him take came from the slot position. Look sharp, man. Looked like you would expect Mikey Sainristil to look coming into year two. Perimeter corner, Trey Amos, again, ball hawking out there playing Jonathan Jones out there. Noah Igbenogany. Last year, he was your starting slot once Mikey Sainristil moved in outside. Noah Igbenogany played pretty much exclusively outside on OTA day one. So some interesting stuff there from the OTA observations. While some veterans are missing, the tone and tempo of practice did not suffer. And that's a credit to the coaching staff that's not just returning, but evolving. That coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Dan Quinn's message is clear. This team isn't waiting to arrive. It's hunting for greatness now. And that mindset is showing up in every detail of how they practice. Dan Quinn setting the tone here, right? You love an organization where the higher ups say it's all about the guys, below me. The guys below them say it's all about the guy above us, right? And in this situation, Dan Quinn talks about the players set the standard. The players, put the standard agreement together. I don't call it a motto, but a creed maybe. Put the creed together. It's all about the players. It's player led, player developed, player enforced, all that stuff. And you certainly hear the players talk about it. Like, yeah, we got to make sure the new guys know what's up. We got to make sure they're holding the standard. But they also talk about DQ, what DQ installs in them or instills in them. The coaches talk about DQ and the culture he creates. Kliff Kingsbury talked about why he stayed here. Quote, "DQ has created a tremendous culture. I'm excited to continue to learn from him and these other coaches continue to try to build this thing," end quote. When he was asked about, you made the decision to not take any coaching interviews, head coaching interviews. You made that decision. You come back here. What is that about? And that's what he talked about, was that culture. It's in a culture of being aggressive, playing with energy, right? You want to play fast, but not just say play fast. Everybody says play fast, right? But there's a difference between saying we want people to play fast and then giving them so much to think about that they can't play fast. We've seen that before in this organization. Dan Quinn talking about we're always the hunters, right? He was going to get asked a question about, now that you've been in the NFC Championship game, now that you won 12 games, now that you're super popular, 5 primetime games, 10 national spotlight games, all this other stuff, you're going to be the hunted. And he said, well, let me stop you there. We're never going to be the hunted. We are always going to be the hunter. He's talked about it's a mindset. It's how we get down. That's how Dan Quinn says those things. And I love it, man. I absolutely love it. Maybe you want to stand up and flip a table right there in the media annex, although probably not a good idea. Probably would have gone viral for all the wrong reasons and then lost my credentials. So I didn't do that. Fortunately, we're here to talk right now. But it's also about accountability, right? Accountability to each other, accountability to yourself, accountability to the mission, tone setting, right? Every single thing. Like you talk about the pad drill. That pad drill is all about setting the tone. It's all about getting that blood going because we want this entire practice to be juice, right? We want all of that stuff going. So you just hear the accountability and that tone setting all across the thing. And you just see a squad where everybody looks and plays like they have something to prove. They practice like that. Bobby Wagner goes out there and practices like he has something to prove. Zach Ertz, seeing Zach Ertz doing extra reps, right? David Rye, tight ends position coach David Rye doing position drills, release drills with Zach Ertz while his other tight ends are doing other stuff. Like, so they're always working. They're always working towards something because it's like they have this just something to prove, right? The culture is why this coaching staff is intact. Not just Kliff Kingsbury, but these other coaches that had opportunities but decided to return. And that hunting mentality that Dan Quinn talked about trickles all the way down to the players. Jayden Daniels saying on Wednesday, quote, I got to go out there and prove myself each and every day. 10, 20 years down the road, you have to prove yourself each and every season, end quote. And that is the exact type of mentality you want from a quarterback. You got other quarterbacks out here, looking at you, Aaron Rodgers, who are just keeping a team like the Pittsburgh Steelers dangling on the hook, being like, yeah, guys, I'll get there when I get there, and all this other stuff. We just saw what he did in New York and all this other stuff. Like, this isn't a guy who's out here to prove himself year in and year out. This is a guy who thinks he's already done it. He's already made it. You ain't going to tell him nothing. He's got nothing to learn. Like, no, don't give me that guy. Give me this guy. Give me Jayden Daniels, who people are talking about as MVP candidate, Super Bowl contenders, best rookie year of any sport ever, all this stuff. Everybody loves him. Everybody wants a piece of him. Nike's got a piece of him. Everybody, the NFL wants to put him in photo shoots. Talking about maybe he's a Madden cover athlete or whatever. You know what I mean? Hard Knocks is going to come after him. But this dude's just out here saying, I got to prove myself. It's year 2. I got to prove myself again. Year 1 don't matter. Year 2 is what matters. So that mindset is just, it's coming from Dan Quinn. It's embedded in the coaching staff. It's echoed by the coordinators and is lived out by the players. Not just Jayden, but you see Bobby Wagner again out there. You see Quan Martin out there, Frankie Louvu out there, Zach Ertz, Terry McLaurin when he's on the field, Deebo Samuel doing it, right? And yeah, again, you hear it from Jayden, quote, you have to prove yourself each and every day, end quote. I mean, it just sums it up. This isn't just about talent. It's about a team committed to growing together, pushing each other, continuing to set to the center to set, but now you're continue to set and embed and really take hold of the new standard here in Washington. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Commanders. Coming up next on Locked On Commanders, we'll take a closer look at what new defensive lineman Dietrich Wise brings to Washington, why his fit in Dan Quinn's system might be better than some people realize. In the meantime, if you've got questions or comments, you can text me directly by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. For your second listen today, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast with Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino. As training camps get closer, they're going to help you stay the most informed NFL fans around you. You can find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you're getting your podcast. That's going to do it for today's episode. Thanks, as always, for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day. Every day to all the everydayers. See you, and I appreciate you. Until next time, stay safe, be good to each other. We'll talk again soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.